So I took in David and his sister Roisin. They were 18 months old and 2 months old when my sister passed away, became a dad overnight. And then, so fast forward a little bit to about 3 weeks ago, and taking care of David and Roisin, and he's now, about a little over 2. And they had been staying with my parents for a little while, but they had just come back to Virginia Beach, and it was like their first night back at my house. And David had a little cold, and we thought it was like the croup or something like that. It was like a barking cough. He had it for like a day with my parents, and we thought he was on the mend from it. It seemed like it was just, it was a virus, it was going to go away. But I didn't know that it was something more serious. And so 3 weeks ago, Sunday morning, I was waking up, and I was just like spending time with the Lord to start the day. And I was reading this passage in Matthew 8, and it talks about Jesus when he calms a storm. And it says that he got into the boat with his disciples, and this furious storm came up. And it said the disciples were very afraid, and they cried out to Jesus, and they said, "Save us." And then Jesus is like, "Oh, you have little faith. Why are you so afraid?" They're in the middle of this crazy tornado on the sea, and Jesus is like, "Why are you afraid?" And I wrote in my journal, and I said, Jesus, he calls us, to have faith even in the atmosphere of circumstances that are terrifying. And I wrote that in my journal. And I didn't know, that a minute later, I thought, oh, he's sleeping a little later than normal. And maybe I should just go up and check on him. I thought, he was sick, but I'm like, let me just go up and check on him. So I go upstairs into his bedroom, and he's in his crib, and he's completely purple, and he's gasping for air, and he's basically can't even move at all, can't cry, can't scream, and he's like a rag doll. And I snatch him up out of his crib, and immediately, I just run to the hospital. I get into my car, I leave his sister there in the playpen, and on the drive there, I call my parents, and I'm just like, go get Rosie, she's alone in the house, David's not breathing. And as I'm driving to the hospital, David stops breathing completely and goes into cardiac arrest, and pretty much dies right there in my arms. And I'm just praying the whole time. Jesus, you are his healer. Jesus, heal him right now. I'm hitting his chest, blowing his mouth, and I'm like declaring healing over him. This is not going to happen. And I get to the hospital, and I run into the ER. He'd probably been down for maybe just a couple of minutes. I drove like 80, 90 miles per hour through every stoplight, broke every traffic law there was. And when I go into the ER, he gets swarmed with people, and there was about like 3 rounds of chest compressions, and I'm just sitting there, I'm just praying right there in the room, and then he just comes back to life. His pulse comes back, he starts breathing again, and gets stable. And actually, one of the members of our church, Molly, was the nurse that was right there to take him in.
Wow, that's amazing.
And you see if you show the picture.
Wow.
This is David, and
this is my little
and this
nephew.
is Molly right here.
Oh, that's
And
my nephew. So
And this is right before he's about to get emergency lifted to CHKD. And this is like, you can see he's like white as a ghost, but before he was completely purple. And this is right after they got the ventilator in him. And, but I'm in this moment, where we're going to the hospital, and, I get this verse, Psalm 27, and it talks about how, you will see the goodness of God in the land of the living. And I just start declaring that over him in the ambulance on the way. I'm reading this verse over him. I'm sending out texts to some people just to pray, sending out that verse and saying, this is it. He's going to see the goodness of God in the land of the living. This is not going to happen. And this is the position of faith that, I just took from the very moment that this happened. And we get to the hospital, and he's on the ventilator for the next, 3 days. Actually, they tried to pull out the ventilator once, but his throat was completely closed up. See, what had happened to him is he got the flu, he got the coronavirus, and he got a bacterial infection in his esophagus. And so his throat, and it's not the crazy coronavirus from China, it's like a different strain of it. There's many strains of it. But his throat had completely closed up. So basically, when I went to go see him, he couldn't breathe at all. He was like gasping for air. If, when I got to the hospital and talking to the nurse, and the nurse is like, yeah, like, if you hadn't driven to the hospital right then like you did, if it had been even like a couple minutes later, he would have been dead. It would have been over. That was like the difference in time. So Jesus saved his life, but then, you think like, all right, great, he's good, but like this walk of faith, man, you just have to keep staying strong in it. And because a couple days later, when they took him off the ventilator, he was basically catatonic, a vegetable. And we can show the next picture. This is him when he came off the ventilator. He could barely even move. We were happy even with him moving his hand. He wasn't able to open his eyes. And, because we thought that when he came back, like he was going to be back himself. Once he comes off the ventilator and is breathing on his own, he's going to be okay. But that just wasn't the case. And so, that morning, the Holy Spirit, was just talking to me as I was praying the next day, like after he got taken off the ventilator. And God had told me, like, this is only temporary. You have to just stay walking this straight line of faith. Do not give up. Stand up and love your son right now, because the love that you give right now is going to pay enormous dividends in the future. Hallelujah. And God had told me, he says, he will come back into the land of the living, and he will be stronger than ever. I am restoring the spirit of his mind. Do not listen to what people are going to say to you today, because they do not see what is really going on. They only see a fraction of what is going on.
This is so powerful.
And this was like 3 days later into it. And that was the day that they took an MRI, and the doctors told me that he had brain damage. And that they didn't know if he was going to recover at all. And that there was no way to be able to know. But God had already told me, you don't listen to what they're saying. You just pay attention to what I'm doing. Amen. And so after that, it went like a couple days, and he was just progressing a little bit, moving a little bit more. He got moved up to neurology department of CHKD, and he was not really responsive. But and I decided, all right, well, you know what? I'm not giving up here. This is not what's going to happen. God has given me a word. So I just start to fast. There's a verse in Mark. It says, when the disciples wanted to be able to cast out a demon of a boy that was like afflicted, and he actually had like different illnesses too, that was because of a demon. Jesus said, some of these things only come out by prayer and fasting. And so I just began a 3-day water fast, and just focusing on praying for Davey. And on the third day, there was a test coming up where they were going to see if he could eat on his own. And because one of the things, when you have brain damage, like everything can shut down. You might not be able to digest food. You might not be able to do any of your functions. And if he couldn't eat, they were going to have to do a surgery and implant this tube in his stomach, so that like for the rest of his life, he might have to be fed through like this tube in his stomach. And so on the last day of my fast, they have this test, and then I got to break my fast with my son, because he could eat and I could eat. It was like, and he was able to eat solid food. And then as soon as he started eating, it was like crazy. Like he started coming alive. Like he was a big eater before. And so the next day after he broke his fast, I was just like trying to talk to him, and I go, hey Davey, I go, what are you thinking about?